When my 4-year-old daughter was wheeled out of open-heart surgery, pale, hooked up to a dozen monitors and barely breathing, I sent one single photo to our family group chat. "She wants to see you," I typed with trembling fingers. Seconds later, my stepmother sent back a message that froze the blood in my veins. "She lived. Stop making her a problem." My brother instantly added, "Busy. Handle it." The room went dead silent as I stared at those cold text messages while sitting in the pediatric ICU. Everyone in my family thought this heartless blow would crush me, leaving me weeping and begging for their sympathy. But instead of crying or screaming, I took a slow, deep breath, looked down at my brave little girl, and sent back a 2-word reply. "It's okay." What my stepmother and brother didn't realize was that I wasn't just accepting their cruelty. At 10 p.m. that exact same night, what popped up on breaking news and hit their legal inboxes made them drop their phones in absolute, shivering terror. Follow my story to the end to see how one greedy message destroyed their entire lives. When my 4-year-old daughter was wheeled out of open-heart surgery, pale, hooked up to a dozen monitors and barely breathing, I sent one single photo to our family group chat. "She wants to see you," I typed with trembling fingers. Seconds later, my stepmother sent back a message that froze the blood in my veins. "She lived. Stop making her a problem." My brother instantly added, "Busy. Handle it." The room went dead silent as I stared at those cold text messages while sitting in the pediatric ICU. Everyone in my family thought this heartless blow would crush me, leaving me weeping and begging for their sympathy. But instead of crying or screaming, I took a slow, deep breath, looked down at my brave little girl, and sent back a 2-word reply. "It's okay." What my stepmother and brother didn't realize was that I wasn't just accepting their cruelty. At 10 p.m. that exact same night, what popped up on breaking news and hit their legal inboxes made them drop their phones in absolute, shivering terror. Follow my story to the end to see how one greedy message destroyed their entire lives. My name is Clara Vance. I'm 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my presence in my own family felt like an inconvenient footnote. Growing up, I was the quiet, independent daughter who worked long hours to build a stable life without asking for handouts. But the fragile stability of our household completely shattered 8 years ago when my father passed away, leaving behind his second wife, Brenda. Brenda was a master of subtle manipulation, wrapped in designer coats and dripping with artificial sweetness. The moment my father was buried, Brenda took absolute control over our family's social standing and focused all her maternal energy on her golden child, my younger brother, Julian. In Brenda's eyes, Julian was a prodigy who could do no wrong, despite his long record of failed business ventures, maxed-out credit cards, and an insatiable desire for luxury. Every mistake Julian made was swept under the rug, funded quietly by what Brenda claimed was my father's remaining estate. Meanwhile, I was treated like a ghost, expected to keep my head down and never question how my father's business assets were being managed. I tolerated the cold shoulder for years, focusing entirely on raising my sweet 4-year-old daughter, Lily. Everything reached a terrifying breaking point 3 days ago when Lily collapsed in our living room. Her little lips turned blue, and her chest labored for air. I rushed her to the emergency room, where doctors delivered a devastating diagnosis, a congenital heart defect that required immediate, emergency open-heart surgery to save her life. For 8 agonizing hours, I sat alone in the surgical waiting room, my hands shaking as I listened to the distant hum of medical monitors. I prayed with every fiber of my being for my little girl to pull through. When the head surgeon finally stepped out and confirmed the operation was a success, a wave of profound relief washed over me. As they moved Lily into the pediatric ICU, hooked up to 4 lines and heart monitors, my heart aching with raw love, I thought of family. I naively believed that even Brenda and Julian would soften their hearts faced with a child surviving life-saving surgery. I snapped a small photo of Lily resting quietly, sent it to the group chat, and typed, "She wants to see you." The response I got was a brutal reminder of who they really were. Within seconds, Brenda's message lit up the screen. "She lived. Stop making her a problem." Julian followed immediately with a cold, uncaring, busy. Handle it. They didn't care if Lily lived or died. To them, my daughter was just a distraction from their luxurious lifestyle. Before we get into how I turned their world upside down, comment below with the city you are watching from so I can see how far our story reaches. Sitting in that dim pediatric ICU, watching the steady green line of Lily's heart monitor, something inside me permanently shifted. The grief and exhaustion that had weighed on me for hours evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I stared at Brenda and Julian's text messages glowing on my phone screen, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel hurt. I felt a sudden, profound realization. They genuinely believed they held all the power. They thought they were sitting on top of the world, looking down on me as a helpless, struggling single mother who would forever beg for their scraps. What Brenda and Julian had completely forgotten in their blind, arrogant greed was a massive legal reality. A reality that my late grandfather had carefully put into place long before Brenda ever set foot in our family. My grandfather was a brilliant, self-made man who built our family's commercial real estate empire from the ground up. He saw right through Brenda's shallow, gold-digging nature from the very first day my father introduced her. He knew that if he left his multi-million-dollar estate and commercial properties directly to my father or Brenda, they would squander it all on flashy cars, designer clothes, and bad investments. That was why, on his deathbed, my grandfather established an irrevocable family trust. Brenda had spent the last 8 years operating under the delusional assumption that when my father passed, the sprawling family estate, the downtown commercial buildings, and the corporate accounts automatically defaulted to her through probate court. She thought she was the undisputed matriarch, generously allowing my brother Julian to use corporate credit lines to fund his chaotic lifestyle. Over the last 3 years alone, Julian had launched 4 separate failed business ventures, a luxury lounge, an exotic car rental service, a high-end clothing line, and a crypto hedge fund. Every single one of them sank into massive debt, and every single time, Brenda used the corporate accounts to quietly bail him out. They lived in a golden palace of absolute arrogance, completely oblivious to the fine print of my grandfather's legal will. According to the strict terms of that irrevocable trust, the executive power and absolute control of the entire family empire did not belong to Brenda. It was set to transition exclusively to me upon my 32nd birthday, a milestone I had reached just 2 months ago. Furthermore, my grandfather had inserted a strict ethical compliance clause into the trust documents. It explicitly stated that if any potential beneficiary engaged in severe moral turpitude, financial endangerment of the primary trust assets, or willful abandonment of direct family members during documented life-threatening medical emergencies, their personal allowance and rights to the primary estate would be permanently and immediately forfeited. While I had been working extra shifts and exhausting myself to cover Lily's upcoming medical bills, Brenda and Julian were burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars of corporate trust funds. They were using money that legally belonged to my daughter's future to pay for Julian's luxury apartment, high-end dinners, and country club memberships. They assumed I was too soft, too quiet, and too overwhelmed by my daughter's illness to ever look at the bank registries or question their authority. They thought they were playing a high-stakes game of chess, but they didn't even realize I owned the board. Looking down at Lily's peaceful face as she slept in that hospital bed, I pulled out my purse, retrieved a sleek black notebook containing my grandfather's original legal contacts, and unlocked my phone. It was time to remind Brenda and Julian who actually controlled the family fortune. I picked up my phone and dialed David Vance, my grandfather's veteran estate attorney. David was a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who had been waiting for this exact moment for over a decade. When I explained the situation and sent him digital screenshots of Brenda and Julian's text messages from the ICU, the silence on the other end of the line was cold and heavy. "Clara," David said, his voice dropping into a hard, focused register. "By sending those explicit text messages during a documented pediatric life-saving surgery, your stepmother and brother have legally handed us the ultimate weapon. They have officially triggered the moral turpitude and willful abandonment clauses of your grandfather's trust." While sitting in the quiet glow of the hospital monitors, David and I went to work. With a few precise legal filings, David activated my executive trustee authority over the entire family empire. We initiated an immediate forensic audit of all corporate holdings and executed a total freeze on every joint account, corporate credit card, and secondary line of credit tied to Brenda and Julian's names. Every single penny they had been recklessly spending was locked down tight within minutes. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted them to understand the full weight of what they had done, and I wanted it done publicly. Earlier that week, a local news network had reached out to the hospital to cover a special segment on regional pediatric health foundations and the high-profile family trusts that help fund advanced surgical wings. I had initially politely declined an interview, wanting to keep our lives private. But now, sitting in that ICU room, I called the lead investigative reporter back. I agreed to let them air a live breaking story on Lily's miraculous surgery, highlighting our family's corporate entity as the primary sponsor, while casually granting the network permission to review the newly frozen corporate disclosures. By 9:45 p.m., the stage was completely set. David had filed emergency court injunctions to secure the primary estate, while the news crew finalized their late-night broadcast segment. At precisely 10 p.m., miles away in their sprawling suburban living room, Brenda and Julian were sitting on custom leather sofas, pouring glasses of expensive champagne, completely oblivious to the hurricane about to hit them. They were likely laughing about how easily they had put me in my place earlier that afternoon. Suddenly, the television screen flashed with a bold red banner. Breaking news. Major regional family trust frozen amid forensic audit and child neglect inquiry. The news anchor's voice echoed through their pristine living room, detailing how the executive trustee of the Vance commercial empire had frozen all assets following a severe breach of trust ethics during an emergency pediatric open-heart surgery. Simultaneously, both of their smartphones began vibrating frantically on the glass coffee table. Pinging alert after alert, their screens flooded with urgent red banking notifications. Transaction declined. Account suspended. Corporate line of credit terminated. Brenda's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. Julian scrambled for his phone, his face draining of all color as he stared at a zero balance across every single one of his luxury business accounts. The cold, arrogant illusion they had spent 8 years building had completely disintegrated in less than 10 seconds. They stared at their screens in absolute, shivering terror, finally realizing that the quiet daughter they had discarded had just stripped them of everything. The fallout from that 10 p.m. broadcast was instantaneous and explosive. Less than 2 minutes after the news segment aired, my phone began vibrating continuously against the ICU tray table. The screen lit up with relentless incoming calls from Brenda and Julian. When I didn't answer, the text messages started flooding in, shifting rapidly from furious demands to breathless, hysterical panic. "Clara, what did you do?" Brenda typed in all caps. "Unfreeze these accounts right now. Your brother's business cards are being rejected, and the bank is threatening to seize the cars." Julian followed right behind with a frantic, "You've lost your mind. You're ruining this family over a stupid misunderstanding. Pick up the phone." I didn't reply to a single message. I simply set the phone face down, walked over to Lily's bedside, and smoothed back her hair as she rested peacefully. They had spent years treating me like an invisible ghost, and now they were begging a ghost for mercy. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the confrontation reached its boiling point. I was sitting in the private consultation room just outside the pediatric unit when the heavy double doors swung open. Brenda and Julian came storming down the hallway, their faces pale, eyes bloodshot, and clothes rumpled after a sleepless night of financial terror. They looked entirely unhinged, drawing shocked looks from the nursing staff. "Clara," Brenda shrieked, her synthetic, polished facade completely gone. She marched right up to my table, slamming her designer purse down. "Have you lost your mind? The bank locked us out of the main house accounts. Julian's landlord just issued an eviction warning for his apartment. You are going to sign a withdrawal waiver right now and fix this mess before you destroy our entire reputation." Julian stepped forward, leaning over the table with an aggressive, desperate glare. "You think you're smart, Clara? You used a sick kid to pull a cheap legal stunt. Sign the release papers now, or I swear we will sue you for corporate sabotage. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I slowly stood up, looked them both dead in the eye, and let out a calm, quiet sigh. You really still don't get it, do you? I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. You thought you were speaking to a helpless single mother yesterday. You thought you could tell me to stop making my daughter your problem while living off my grandfather's money. Before Brenda could scream another insult, my attorney, David Vance, stepped out from the adjacent hallway accompanied by 2 uniformed hospital security officers and a formal legal courier. David didn't waste a single second. With clinical precision, he handed Brenda and Julian 2 thick, stamped manila folders. Brenda Vance and Julian Vance, David announced, his voice echoing clearly across the room. You are hereby served with formal 30-day emergency eviction notices for the primary estate property. Furthermore, as the executive trustee, Mrs. Clara Vance has officially filed a corporate fraud and grand larceny report with the state prosecutor's office regarding $450,000 in unauthorized corporate expenditures over the last 3 years. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably as she opened the folder and saw the certified paper trail. Attached right to the front page was a high-resolution printed screenshot of her own text message from the day before. She lived. Stop making her our problem. That single text message, David added coldly, is legally documented proof of your willful neglect and moral turpitude, permanently forfeiting your spousal living allowance under Section 4 of the Irrevocable Trust. Brenda staggered backward, her face turning a ghostly shade of white as the trap snapped shut permanently. They had come to force my submission, but they walked directly into their own complete undoing. Standing in that quiet hospital hallway, watching Brenda and Julian stumble backward in pure, paralyzed horror, I felt no anger or hatred, only a deep, liberating sense of peace. The spell was broken forever. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of their greed unfolded with brutal, unwavering speed. Deprived of my grandfather's corporate funds to shield them, Julian's fragile house of cards completely collapsed. Without the ability to cover his debts, his luxury lounge and rental business were forced into immediate liquidation. Facing mounting legal pressure from corporate creditors, Julian had to move into a cramped, dingy one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, taking a low-level sales job just to keep up with his compounding personal debts. As for Brenda, her precious high-society reputation was permanently shattered. Once word spread through our social circle about her formal eviction from the estate and her heartless text message during a 4-year-old's open-heart surgery, her wealthy friends completely abandoned her. Unable to afford her lavish lifestyle without her forfeited spousal allowance, she was forced to downsize drastically, trading her designer gowns and luxury sedans for a quiet, humble reality she had spent decades trying to avoid. Their relentless attempt to cast me aside had delivered its own perfect, poetic punishment. Meanwhile, back in the warmth of our world, life blossomed into something truly beautiful. Lily's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Day by day, the color returned to her cheeks, her laughter filled our home again, and her small, brave heart grew stronger than ever. Using the full authority of my grandfather's trust, I permanently secured Lily's medical and educational future, ensuring she would never have to worry about a single thing. I also established a dedicated medical fund within the trust, directing corporate resources to help fund life-saving surgeries and equipment for other families sitting anxiously in pediatric ICUs, making sure no parent ever feels as isolated as I did on that terrifying afternoon. Standing up to Brenda and Julian didn't just protect my inheritance and my daughter's future. It gave me the ultimate strength to realize that true family isn't about shared names, bloodlines, or superficial appearances. It's about unconditional love, loyalty, and standing by the people who need you most when the storm hits. Now, I'm curious about all of you who have followed my story until the very end. What would you have done if your own family sent a heartless text message like that during your child's life-saving surgery? Would you have found a way to forgive them? Or would you have cut them off completely and let the law take its course? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. And make sure to mention the city or country you're watching from so I can see how far our story has reached. Also, don't forget to check out the 2 incredible channel favorite stories appearing on your screen right now. Thank you so much for watching.